Godly parenting. Parents should do all they can to model and teach Christian values to their children. But they must also understand that being godly is no guarantee that their children will always do what is right in God's sight. Here's Dr. Gene Getz to explain.
2 Kings 21, 1-2. Judah's king Manasseh. Who was Manasseh? He was the son of Hezekiah. But notice what happened. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king. He reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. And let me state that again. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, imitating the detestable practices of the nations that the Lord had dispossessed before the Israelites. This is the son of Hezekiah. We read on. Manasseh. Hard to believe. Manasseh also shed so much innocent blood that he filled Jerusalem with it from one end to another. That's incredible. In his 55 years, the evil that he did. This one is, in addition to his sin, he caused Judah to commit so that they did what was evil in the Lord's sight. Again, we're talking about a king of Judah. And so we have a very serious situation here. A very sinful situation regarding a son that had a godly father. Made mistakes. But one of the things Hezekiah did was to remove all this idolatry. Manasseh brought it all back. Now, it'd be interesting to have some background as to why at 12 years of age he began to move in that direction, in spite of everything that he had observed. Well, he did live within a very sinful environment with his peers and with others that were probably seducing him into evil. But if we go to 2 Chronicles, we have another thing that happened to him, which in some respects relates to his father. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they didn't listen, not like the father did. So he brought against them the military commanders of the king of Assyria, and they captured Manasseh with hooks. This is a horrible picture. Bound him with bronze shackles and took him to Babylon. Can you imagine him trudging from Jerusalem to Babylon, which is probably maybe 500 miles through desert? Horrible, horrible situation. But then we read, when he was in distress, he sought the favor of Yahweh his God and earnestly humbled himself before the God of his ancestors. He prayed to him, so he heard his petition, that is, God heard his petition, granted his request, brought him back to Jerusalem to his kingdom. But notice, we read, so Manasseh came to know that Yahweh is God. And I believe that was his conversion. That was his faith experience. After 55 years of evil. And through this a painful experience of being dethroned, carried off to Babylon, persecuted, and undergoing all of these hardships, he fell on his face before God. He repented, and God forgave him. And that, my friends, is God's grace. As we see it here in the Old Testament, he humbled himself. So the reflection and response question is, when discussing the subject of parenting, why is it important both to comfort those whose children have gone astray and to encourage them to keep praying for their repentance? Now, to understand that question, let's go back to the principle. Let's just review the principle and make sure we understand it. Parents should do all they can to model and teach Christian values to their children, but they must also understand that being godly is no guarantee their children will always do what is right in God's sight. So when we talk about that principle, why is it important to comfort parents whose children have gone astray? To encourage them to keep praying for their repentance. Now, they may have gone astray because of a bad parental example. But they may have gone astray because of the environment that led them astray. which is beyond our control. So we don't have a guarantee. But we need to trust God and we need to keep praying. I've mentioned to you that I know of a group that met together over the years and actually prayed for their children. And they saw some marvelous things happen, but sometimes it took a long time. It took a long time in Manasseh's life for him to experience repentance. But we must encourage parents to pray, regardless of the reason they've gone astray. And one of the reasons we need to encourage parents is that parents tend to beat themselves up for their children's failures. That's our temptation. And I think this principle tells us that we need to be encouraged. We've all made mistakes. And it doesn't help to punish ourselves. That doesn't help at all. God offers forgiveness no matter what the problem. One of the first things that happens when we see a child go astray is if we're not careful, the first thing goes through our mind is, what mistake did they make causing their child to go astray? Be careful, because what goes around can come around. And I know parents that have been very judgmental of other parents until they were hit with a problem. And then their whole attitude changed. So we've got to be very, very careful. I think that's a tremendous lesson that we can learn in this situation. And we all make mistakes as well. And we need to be as proactive as possible in the here and now. We can't make up for our mistakes, but we can be there in the here and now. And you've heard me tell the story of my own son, that I felt like in his very formative years in high school, I became so involved in the ministry. And I put the pressure on myself that I neglected to take time to be with him in some very critical moments in his life, such as football games that happened to conflict with a service that we had on a Friday night. I felt such an obligation to the people to be there that I didn't go to those football games, and the elders didn't tell me I had to go. Had to stay and preach. That was my own decision. If I'd gone to the elders and said, I need to be with my son on Friday night, I'll get somebody to replace. I had guys that could have replaced me. I had elders that could have replaced me on that Friday night. And I would have then preached the 3 services on Sunday. I didn't realize how my son felt about that. And we had some good conversations about it. And I went to the elders one time and I said, I feel like I've neglected my son in some of these areas, and I'd like to make it up. And he was had joined the Colorado ski team. He was racing, training. And I said, I'd just like to go up and spend a month with him. Just be there. And they said, go. And at that point in time, I didn't even have the money to do it, and they provided the money for me to go, and my wife. And while I was there, I was talking with Kent one evening when he came over to the condo where we were staying, and I said, Kent, I know I should have been there for you in those high school days. I didn't have to be in church preaching. And I want to make it up to you. That's why I'm here. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, you can't make it up, but you can be here now. And I thought, wow, why didn't I think of that? There's a fine line there, but it's a big one. You can be here now. And that taught me a lesson. You can't make it up, because that's trying to compensate for your guilt. They see through that, for your failure. They want you now for them. And that was a significant turning point in our communication and openness. And we've talked about that since that time on occasions. That was a very critical moment. I learned a great lesson in that situation. So the point being, we need to take advantage of the moment. We need to Be proactive in the here and now. Some things will never change. There are so many variations in this whole situation in terms of parenting. Some things are beyond our control. We couldn't make up for things if we ever tried, because there have been environmental situations like in Manasseh's life that certainly were beyond Hezekiah's control. It was a very wicked environment. But there are times we make mistakes. A lot of mistakes are made by parents because we're not even believers. A lot of parents come to Christ later on in life and they say, boy, I wish I could do it all over again. But you can't. You have to begin now and trust God to see what He will do in those situations. So it's a great principle. Let me just restate it. Parents should do all they can to model and teach Christian values to their children, but they must also understand that being godly is no guarantee that their children will always do what is right in God's sight.